Yes, you're now on live stream.
Perfect, thank you. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this morning's licensing subcommittee. My name is Ben Attrell. I'm a solicitor employed by Portsmouth City Council, and I'll be advising the subcommittee today. The first item on today's agenda is to appoint a chair for this hearing. Can I please have a nomination?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, I nominate Claire Rudy.
Thank you. Is that seconded? Councillor Mason? Can anybody else hear Councillor Mason at the moment?
I don't even see him, never mind hear him.
Yeah, Councillor Mason's present. Is Councillor Rudy willing to take the chair?
She is.
Yeah.
But can we just double check that we can hear Councillor Mason? Could you try speaking, Councillor Mason?
Hello?
Hello.
Yes,
Oh,
we've got audio.
Marvellous. Okay, brilliant. And you can hear everything, Councillor Mason?
Yep.
Marvellous. Okay. So, Councillor Udy, you've been elected as chair for this morning's meeting. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, everyone, for that nomination, Leo. Good morning, everyone. I'm Councillor Udy, and welcome to the Licensing Subcommittee meeting. This meeting is being broadcast to enable the press and public to view the meeting. We are currently meeting virtually in response to the limitations placed on government by the COVID-19 pandemic. Until recently, the law generally stated that members had to be present in the room to make formal decisions at meetings, although it is arguable that this did not apply to the Licensing Committee hearings under the Licensing Act 2003. However, in any event, the law has amended in response to the COVID emergency, and councils are now able to hold all public meetings virtually. For the purposes of this meeting, and having been advised by the City Solicitor, I can confirm that the hearing shall be run pursuant to Section 78 of the Coronavirus Act 2020 and regulations made thereunder, and the Licensing Act 2003, Regulations 2005, which enable the authority to establish its own procedure. Members are reminded to be available throughout the meeting and indicate if they need to leave the proceedings at any point. All three members must be present at all times to be quorate. If any of the evidence is missed by the members due to connectivity or other issues, please raise the matter as soon as possible so it can be addressed. Members, officers and participants are requested to keep their microphones on mute and only turn these on when they are called to speak. This will limit the amount of background noise, which can be very disruptive. Members of the committee who wish to speak should use the chat facility and simply write their name. Also, I do accept the hand raising. That's probably a lot easier because it's just three of us. Please do not use the chat facility for anything else except to raise a point of order. If there are technical difficulties, we will endeavour to resolve these and where necessary have a brief adjournment, but the meeting can proceed where quorate. I will now explain the running order for this meeting. Members will first declare any interests. The licensing officer will report for the first application. As we know today, the second one will resume at 2 o'clock. The members, the applicant or his solicitor, and those having made representations may then ask questions of the licensing officer in that order. The applicant will then present his case and questions may be asked of the applicant. Those who have made representations will also have the opportunity to speak and questions be put to them. Finally, everyone will have the opportunity to sum up their case, starting with those who made representations, the licensing officer and then the applicant. Members will then meet privately for the deliberations and to reach our decision, and it will be circulated to all parties as soon as possible. As far as I know, this will be circulated at the same time as the 2 o'clock meeting, so it may be a little bit later and we do apologise for that. To reiterate, each party will have an opportunity to ask questions at the appropriate time and to make their own representation when asked to do so. Parties are reminded that representations are strictly limited to only those points already raised in your retrospective written applications. You are able to expand upon those points, but you cannot add new. You can be reassured that members have read the papers before the meeting, and as a result, you are asked not simply to read your written representation. This order will then be repeated for this afternoon's separate application. Introductions. I would now like to invite members to introduce themselves. So I will read your names in alphabetical order. Please can you reply stating your name and saying present. I will pause for a few seconds between calling each member. Councillor Leo Madden.
Councillor Leo Madden, present.
Thank you very much, Councillor Madden. And Councillor Lee Mason.
Councillor Lee Mason, present.
Thanks. Now, can I please ask the officers to confirm they are present as follows? Ben Attrell, legal advisor. I've got to say that.
That's right. Thank you. Ben Attrell, present.
Derek Stone, principal licensing officer.
Good morning, present.
Joanne Wildsmith, local democracy officer.
Present.
Thank you very much. I will now ask the following if they are present. Mr. John Walsgrove, the solicitor for the applicant.
Present.
As far as I can see, Mr. Anik is not here. Is that correct?
He's not. He offers his apologies to the committee. He has a hospital appointment at QA this morning.
Okay, thank you very much for relaying that to us. And Councillor Linda Symes to represent the residents. We have the 5 names here. G. Howard, A. Lettin, Mr. and Mrs. Lowe, J. Dixon and C. Hogston. Councillor Symes?
Councillor Symes, present.
Oh, okay. I'll now move on to agenda item number 2, declarations of members' interest. I'll open up Teams so I can actually see the faces of people here. Members, any interest at all? I'll take a head shake. I can see both of you.
No.
Thank you very much. I will now move to the agenda item to consider the application for premises licence, the Old Pier Hut. Mr. Stone, Principal Licensing Officer, please present your report on behalf of the Licensing Manager. Thank you very much.
Good morning, members. So this hearing is in relation to an application for a premises licence for the Old Pier Hut, which is a small hut on the east side of South Parade Pier. And for ease of reference, members, I draw your attention to the photographs and plan in your bundle. The application is made by Mr. Anik and he is represented by Mr. Walsgrove today. Members, you have my report before you, so I will not go through that in detail, but you will see that the application is for a premises licence to be able to make off sales from 10 o'clock in the morning until 2300 hours, Monday to Sunday, with the ability to open the premises from 7 o'clock. In addition to small arcades and fairground style rides, the pier has a large licensed function room, the Gaiety Bar, and other licensed concessions. The pier was closed for several years and reopened in 2017 after major structural repairs.
You went off on our feeds. I don't know if it went off for everyone else, but there's a beep and we lost a bit. So
where did you hear up to, Councillor Mason?
there's a couple of sentences in, so.
Derek, I'm quite mindful that might be your doorbell and it might be the postman if you've got any post due, if you need to get it. It's fine if you need to disappear for 10 seconds.
No, I'm worried. I'm not worried about that. Thank you.
Cool.
So where do you want me to go back to? The actual application is for off sales from 10 o'clock to 2300 hours, Monday to Sunday, with the ability to open the premises from 7 o'clock. So South Parade Pier, I was just giving some history. It was built in 1875. It's got already several licensed premises on the pier itself. There are 5 parts of the pier that are licensed, 2 at the entrance, 1 in the centre on the east side, and 2 large sections at the end. These are the Gaiety Bar and Deep Blue Restaurant. The last 2 have their own separate premises licences. And there was a recent application, members, for a small off-sales facility, and this was granted for an area adjacent to the Gaiety Bar on the 19th of August. The applicant has detailed in the operating schedule the steps they intend to support and promote the licensing objectives. There are no objections from any of the responsible authorities, each responsible authority being an expert in their respective field. So, for example, in relation to the police, they are the main source of advice in relation to the prevention of crime and disorder. There were a number of representations received from local residents. In total, 36 representations were made. Of those, 10 have replied saying they were not attending the hearing, and 5 of them have indicated that they wanted Councillor Symes to speak on their behalf. One of the representations from D. Sate actually said that they weren't objecting at all to the old Pier Hut premises licence application. They were just objecting to the beach decking. And members, you'll see my officer's note in my report about the beach decking. Almost half of the people who made representations were referencing this decking, which is nothing to do with this application. The applicant complied with all the necessary provisions contained within Part 3 of the Licensing Act 2003 by way of public and press notification, and local ward councillors were also notified. Members, you are required to determine this application once you have heard from all parties, and I've listed in my report at paragraph 5 what you must have regard to first and foremost, being the promotion of the 4 licensing objectives. In my report, I hope I've given some helpful guidance, but I would like to draw your attention specifically to paragraphs 11.1 and 11.2, which deals with the review of premises licences as a key protection to the community, where problems associated with the licensing objectives occur after the grant of a premises licence, and how that licence can be reviewed should that be necessary. Members, I don't propose to say any more at this stage, but I'm available should you have any questions as this hearing unfolds, as is the applicant's solicitor, Mr. Walsgrove. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Stone. Members, questions? Leo, yep. Leo, there you go.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Stone. Could you, you have said in the report, and you've repeated, that there's been absolutely no objections from any of the responsible authorities. And you mentioned the police, but of course there are other parts of the statutory authorities which I would just like to confirm have not made representations. That's environmental health, who would deal with things like noise. That's the Director of Public Health, who would deal with things like concern for public drinking. Not one of them has actually submitted an objection. Is that correct?
That is correct, yes, Councillor Madden.
It's a while since I've been down direct to the pier, mainly because of this lockdown. But I have something in the back of my head saying that the hut operates at the minute, or has been operating, clearly without a license, without a liquor license. Is that correct? Or perhaps that's for Mr. Walsgrove.
Well, it would be for Mr. Walsgrove, but it can operate if it's doing food and hot drinks. And that thing, then that's perfectly acceptable. It'll only be unlawful if they were selling alcohol without a license.
No, what I was trying to get was it's actually an operation, albeit not having a license, a liquor license.
That's correct. Yeah, there are tables and chairs. You can see that in some of the pictures. And
it's just something I think I remember just passing by. This decking, you're absolutely right about the objections to the decking bit. But I tried to establish if there was any application in for decking beside the pier. I couldn't find anything. Is there? I know it's a confusing issue, but can we see why? Can you see why residents might be confused with this, marrying the two together when there's actually no connection? If in fact there is an application in, I presume that would be a planning application, would it?
I believe there was a planning application that went through probably over the last 2 years where the decking has been approved, but it's nothing to do with this premises licence application or with the old beach hut at all.
Okay. Well, that's me for the minute. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Madden. Councillor Mason, do you have any questions?
Just one, can you confirm that it's only sales of alcohol is licensing, the consumption of alcohol isn't a licensable activity, is it?
That's correct, Councillor Mason.
So once it's purchased, it could be consumed anywhere, and it's not a licensable activity.
That's correct.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. One question from me, Derek. Have they had tens and were selling alcohol over the summer period?
No, I don't believe they have. I'll cancel. Sorry, John Walsgrove can answer that.
They did. I mean, I will address you on that. They had temporary event notices for each weekend of August for 3 days, the Friday, Saturday and Sunday of each of 4 weekends.
Well, Councillor Hoody, then I wasn't aware of that, but we've certainly had no adverse reports on it since they've been in operation.
Thank you for that. Any other questions before I move on to John to ask questions? Mr. Walsgrove, sorry. No? Mr. Walsgrove,
no questions.
Okay.
No,
Councillor Symes, do you have any questions of the licensing officer?
No, but I'd just like to make a point of clarification if I could. I was contacted by the applicant, who I knew as a long-standing restaurant owner of...
Councillor Symes, I think we can't have this until you do your representation, I'm afraid.
Okay, all right.
Thank you, though. We'll move on to Mr. Walsgrove next if you have no further questions. Mr. Walsgrove, could you please present the case on behalf of the applicant?
Thank you, Chair. As you've heard from Councillor Symes, in fact, my client is an experienced licensed operator in Portsmouth, so has worked and operated other restaurants in the area, but is now focusing his efforts on the old Pier Hut. There's nothing in the representations, of course, which suggests anything concerning about the way he may run premises if you decided to grant the licence. So in old parlance, under the old Licensing Act, he's nothing more than a fit and proper person to operate these premises. The Pier Hut sells a variety of hot food and hot and cold drinks, pizzas, wraps, gyros, which is like a Greek kebab, and he's been open for several months selling the food and drink. As you heard me say earlier, he also has been selling alcohol during August under temporary event notices over the 4 weekends, including the bank holiday weekend. He's actually only selling a very small selection of wine and beer, which is decanted into plastic cups. And the alcohol is very much an ancillary part. The focus of the business is obviously the food. When Mr. Anick instructed me to deal with the licence, there was no seating. I actually visited the premises and it was just the hut selling direct to members of the public. And you will note that in correspondence with people who made representations, I made reference to the fact that there wasn't seating, but where Mr. Anick business has been successful, and with the addition of the alcohol for temporary event notices, he has placed picnic tables out next to the old Pier Hut, so there is now some seating, so that just clears that up. There'd be a maximum of 6 tables there for 24 people, but he doesn't always put all of the tables out. It very much depends on what day of the week it is and how busy he's going to be. But as Councillor Mason rightly pointed out, consumption of alcohol isn't a licensable activity, and so people have been using those tables and chairs. They have been having their meals there, and they have been consuming alcohol during August, and without, as far as Mr. Anick is aware, any concerns being raised. So none of the letters of representation or subsequent emails and correspondence that came in make any mention of any problems actually arising from the sale of alcohol during those 4 weeks. As Mr. Stone pointed out to you, there have been no representations from responsible authorities, and Councillor Madden rightly pointed out that it goes to an array of responsible authorities: environmental health, public protection, the police, planning, etc., etc. None have made representations. In your committee papers at page 5, paragraph 9.12 is just repeating the fact that weight should be given to the views of the responsible authorities. As Mr. Stone said, they're experts in their field, and you would look to them as your first source of advice on things of crime and disorder, public safety, public nuisance, and the protection of children from harm. I'd also draw your attention on your committee papers at page 7, paragraph 9.43, which you as experienced councillors know your decision in this matter must be based on evidence, so some credible evidence. And I say the credible evidence we're putting forward in support of the application is, firstly, there has been no responsible authority objection. Secondly, it is a very limited offer of alcohol, and it's ancillary effectively to the mainstay of the trade, which is food. He's operated tens over 4 weekends, and probably the busiest weekends of the entire 12 months. And he's operated those without any issues and without any adverse comment from anyone. And lastly, he's an experienced operator that has put appropriate measures in place. So from his operating schedule, you can see he operates a Challenge 25 policy. All of his staff are trained. He maintains refusal logs to record any occasions when a customer may be refused service. And also he offered a condition that there would be no high strength beer, lagers or ciders. And the conditions were drafted in the application after prior consultation with both the licensing authority and the police. So we didn't submit this application without having spoken to both your own licensing officer and the police licensing officer, because we just wanted to get a feel initially of what issues there might be around selling alcohol for consumption off the premises, and none were raised. So against that credible evidence, what we say you have are expressions of fear of what might happen from local residents. And of course, to counter those expressions of what might happen, we say, well, the busiest month of the year of August, where actually during this COVID lockdown period, there were far more people on Southsea Beach than perhaps there ordinarily might be. The second point is the decking. The issue of the decking, I think, and respectfully submit to you, has caused a lot of anxiety amongst residents, and in my view has prompted the representations that came in. Just going back to Mr. Stone's comment about a recent licence application for the beach bar a little further up the pier, again, for alcohol, for off sales, so the same application for effectively the same hours. There weren't any other written representations on that application, and in fact, Councillor Symes, who appeared on that occasion, having made a representation, then confirmed she wasn't objecting to it. So I think there's been a real fear around the decking, where it said it could accommodate up to 150 people. And you've heard from your licensing officer, and I want to restate, it has absolutely nothing to do with the old pier hut. Now, you know that, or if you don't, I'm about to tell you that I act for Tommy Ware, who owns South Parade Pier. And it was a complete surprise to me, because I've not been involved at all in any discussions about that. So I wanted to clarify with him what the situation was. And he simply said what you've already been informed from Mr. Stone, that a planning application was submitted, it was approved, has been granted, has got nothing to do with the old pier hut, and there's currently no intention at the moment to progress with the construction of that decking and any future application in relation to any premises or another hut which may be put on that decking. So you must discount that entirely from your decision making today. I have to say, I'm quite keen to find out why all the residents thought that the decking was part of this application, and it's a shame some of the residents have not appeared today, because they could have simply been asked, where did you get that information from? Because however they got it, they've been misled in this application, which is a great shame. I did, as you've probably seen, write to residents, and I have those that had mentioned the decking, I had tried to reassure them that it was nothing to do with this premises. And as you've heard, one of them's actually withdrawn their objection to it. Just the last point I wish to make is, if you turn to page 29 in your committee papers, that's the plan of the pier, which shows the position of the pier hut. let me just find it myself. If you look at the old pier hut, which is the rectangle with the diagonal line through it, the two rectangles immediately opposite, which have a slightly bolder line around them, so they're adjacent to the two entrances to the pier, those two premises are licensed to sell alcohol for the consumption off the premises already, but they don't operate as licensed premises. One's an ice cream parlour, I think the other is a beauty and treatment centre, so not selling alcohol at all. So in essence, in terms of this application, if you were to refuse it, Mr. Anick could simply arrange with Mr. Ware to move into one of those other premises and start selling alcohol and run his business from either one of those units. So obviously that's not something he wants to do, because he's already established his business and he's already proved in my respectful submission that he's a responsible licence holder, where people purchasing alcohol with their food from him are not causing any of the nuisance outlined in the letters of representation. So I think that's as far as I can take the matter without repeating myself, but of course I'm happy to answer any questions. I have arranged with Mr. Anick that should you have any questions which I'm not able to deal with, I will try and contact him, although his appointment is at 10:30, so we may have to delay getting his answer for however long his appointment is going to take. But hopefully I will be able to deal with anything that you may throw at us. And I'll leave the application there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Walsgrove. I'm respectful of his doctor's appointment, so if he does need to ask questions and we do have to have a short adjournment, then I'm more than happy to do that. Ben, I'm just checking in to see if you're still here, because we can't see your face.
Yes, I'm still here. Hopefully you can hear me.
Cool, yeah, absolutely. I just wondered, I just kind of got a wave of panic all of a sudden.
Councillors, to have your ear. Once you've finished asking councillors if they have any questions, I would have a question to raise. Thank you.
All right, cool. I've got some as well, but I'll ask councillors first. Councillor Madden or Mason? Leo? Councillor Mason?
Questions. Thank you very much, Mr. Walsgrove, for your representation. Could we just put, and of course I was a bit confused myself, as I intimated earlier on about this decking bit, because I hadn't come across it, but that's probably my fault. But just to confirm, and I understand it's absolutely nothing to do with this application, I understand that. But could I just ask whether Mr. Anick was involved in the application for this decking at any stage?
No, he wasn't.
Okay. Well, I assumed that, but I just wanted to confirm that. Could you tell me then, when you think, if with the liquor license, how often do you think the hut would be open? Because presumably it would be seasonal, rather than open 360 odd days a year. Would that be correct?
You're right. He's only going to open when people are going to be there, because it's a new business and obviously we've not moved into the winter. I wouldn't be able to say, well, it's going to be closed during the winter, but clearly if there's nobody around in Southsea, he's not going to open. So I have to put the application on the basis that it would be open all year round, but common sense tells you that there's going to be substantial periods where he's not.
Okay, thank you. Could we deal with the opening hours? Because you made an offer. I think some residents saw it differently. That you would close at 2100 hours, or propose that you may do that, or would do that if the objections were withdrawn. And in that you say that Councillor Symes in fact agreed to that herself, and therefore I was under the impression had withdrawn her objection. Only one person, as far as I could make out, did. But where does the applicant stand in relation to closing at 9 o'clock as opposed to 11 o'clock, Mr. Walsgrove?
Yeah, let me do, of course, let me deal with that first point. And obviously my client apologises again for the confusion. After he met Councillor Symes, he telephoned me and he said that's what he thought the discussion had been, that if he reduced the hours to 9 o'clock, there wouldn't be any objection. And obviously, when I then sent that correspondence out, Councillor Symes made it clear that that wasn't what she agreed, and so we sent out another communication to make it clear that there wasn't any agreement by Councillor Symes to that. So again, he offers his apology as he did earlier. In relation to that, he offered the 9 o'clock to reduce the sale of alcohol. He wasn't saying he would then close the old Pier Hut at 9 o'clock. The intention was just to cease alcohol sales at 9 and continue to operate with the food, hot drinks and cold soft drinks until 11 o'clock. The offer was made in the hope that he would be able to persuade them to withdraw their objections so that he could get the licence quicker and benefit from the summer trade, instead of just having effectively 12 days under temporary event notices. So the application before you is for it to sell alcohol all the time it is open up to 11 o'clock, because obviously the residents were still concerned, even if the hours were reduced. And I would say there's, in my respectful submission, there's no evidence to say why those hours should be cut back to 9 p.m, because he's proved with his temporary event notices that selling alcohol to 11 does not cause any crime and disorder or public nuisance. And certainly that's a view held by the police, given that they've not made their representation and given the discussion I had with them before we submitted the application.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Madden. Councillor Mason, any questions?
I also had a bit of confusion with the 9 o'clock or the 11 o'clock, but I'm pleased it's been clarified. It is the intention to have 11 o'clock. It does seem a bit strange sort of offering it out and then withdrawing it. And also with Leo's comments, if it's got a liquor licence, we'll be able to trade for all the days, whether it uses them or not. And anyone who takes over would have all of those days going forward as well. So I don't think I've really got any questions, since it's been quite well covered the time situation.
Thank you, Councillor Mason. I do have some questions. Is it common practice to contact deputies to offer alternative hours for licensing in return for them rescinding applications? I only say this in reference to a previous licensing application where that also happened. But to talk and explain it like a layman to me, because I'm willing to learn.
Okay, without disclosing any trade secrets as such, yes, it is common practice for two reasons. First of all, obviously I do licensing applications throughout the whole of the UK, including Scotland, Wales and England. And there is an expectation when concerns are raised that an applicant obviously assesses those representations and what's said. And in conjunction with me, we would consider whether there were any credible evidence to support those, but more essentially to ensure the outcome of having a licence granted. Because of course, if objections are withdrawn, we don't have a committee hearing. The licence has to be granted under delegated authority, but only if every single person who's written a representation does so. There are some occasions where we would not make any offer to someone that's made a representation, and we'd rather let the committee just decide themselves on the facts. But here, Mr. Annick was keen to get a premises licence as soon as he could, because obviously, in terms of timing, he wanted that period during the summer to be able to offer that facility rather than the ad hoc basis. So that's why that offer was made, to effectively try and persuade everybody to withdraw. But it was made clear that if everybody didn't withdraw, then the application would proceed to committee on the basis of 11 o'clock. But in answer to your question, yes, it's common practice. I would say in more than 75% of the applications I deal with for new licence or major variations, we would have consultation either with responsible authorities who've made objections or residents, with a view to try and reaching a mediated outcome and not have the additional delay and expense of coming to a committee hearing.
Thank you. I guess it kind of 75% answered my next question, but I'm still going to ask it, and I hope Ben doesn't intervene. Could you tell me why we shouldn't enforce that condition of 9 o'clock if you've already offered it out per se?
You would have to have evidence-based reasons to reduce. If you were going to grant the application, you would have to have evidence which supported the reason for reducing hours from 9 o'clock based on the licensing objectives. You certainly couldn't make a decision on the basis that that's what we offered to try and avoid a committee hearing. So you would have to hear that between 9 and 11 o'clock there is a greater risk of an adverse effect on the licensing objectives. And I'm saying, well, none of your responsible authorities think there's a concern.
Claire, you're muted.
Did I say all of that muted? Sorry, that's the first time I've done that. Ben did raise his hand, so would you like to speak before I ask Councillor Symes if she has any questions of the applicant? And thank you, Mr. Walsgrove.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just to reiterate what Mr. Walsgrove's said to the committee, I endorse that as my legal advice to the committee. It's entirely normal and in fact encouraged by the Act and the guidance that parties negotiate before a hearing and do all they can to avoid a hearing if at all possible. And the Act is very much structured in that way, and it's encouraged. So there's absolutely nothing untoward with a party making an offer of that nature in an attempt to try and avoid a hearing. The other point, Chair, I did say earlier I had a question of the applicant. I note that the responsible authorities haven't made any representations, but I was just wondering, have any conditions been agreed with the responsible authorities by way of I couldn't see anything in the papers that suggested there were any agreed conditions, but often if they don't make representations, it's on the basis that some kind of condition has been agreed.
Because we had that prior consultation with the police, the conditions which are in the operating schedule are the ones that they wanted. So particularly the one regarding no high strength beers. So okay. they didn't ask for anything else, and that's why no other conditions have been agreed with any other responsible authority.
And I noticed there didn't appear to be any, correct me if I'm wrong, any conditions in relation to glass or plastic use. But you did mention during your presentation that the applicant does only decant into plastic. Is that something that, if it is already there, then I apologise, but the applicant would be willing for members to endorse on the licence if they were so minded to grant a licence?
You're right, it isn't there, and I have to express some surprise that that's not what the police asked it first time. However, it was a condition which was imposed or agreed on the beach bar, and yes, my client is happy if the committee thought that was a condition that was appropriate to have the same condition that effectively there's no glass.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair. That's the last of my questions. I can see Councillor Mason.
Councillor Mason, yeah. Councillor Mason.
Thank you much. Just for the last comment from the solicitor about decanting into plastic, I hadn't really picked up on that when I was reading the paperwork a couple of days ago. Surely if it's off sales, it's to be taken away. So if you're decanting everything into plastic, including glass bottles, it's not really facilitating off sales. It's more like on sale being consumed there and then. So how would you be able to stop people taking away a glass bottle, or if the glass has been decanted, that is to be instant consumption, which is pretty much on premises?
It's an unusual position because, of course, the premises is the hut itself. Can you hear me now? Is everybody able to hear me?
I can't hear anything at the moment. Can anyone else?
I can hear Mr. Walsgrove.
I can hear Mr. Walsgrove.
Oh.
I couldn't hear you then.
Shall we try again?
Yeah.
Okay, can you hear me now, Councillor Mason?
Yes, yeah.
Right, thank you. It's a slightly unusual position because the premises which we're licensing is effectively the porter cabin, the old pier hut. So, of course, all of that is a food food kitchen, and there's no, the premises, the pier is the pier. That's not part of his premises. It's just the hut. So every sale is for consumption off, but effectively it's decanted into a plastic cup, as is the same for the beach bar, which was granted a couple of weeks ago. So it's for people to, yes, with their food, to be able to consume the alcohol while they're eating their food, whether that be on the picnic benches, whether it be on the seating elsewhere on the pier, or the seating along the promenade, or on the beach. So it is consumption off the premises, because the premises is the actual hut itself. A bit like, I suppose, a lot of the pubs will have a licence for the pub, and they'll have beer gardens. Well, the consumption in the beer garden is consumption off the premises.
If someone came along and wanted to buy a 6-pack of beer, they wouldn't be able to, or they would have all of them 6 opened and poured into plastic containers.
They would, but no one's ever done that. You wouldn't be able to carry them for a start. But yeah, if there was a group together and they were sat at the picnic benches, then they could order a drink each, and then drink it there. It's not like the Co-op across the road where you would be able to buy a crate of something and go and take that away and drink it. Mr. Anik's experience is that when people have come, when he's had his temporary event notices, they buy one drink with whatever food they've purchased, and then, as I say, they either sit at the picnic benches or they take it away to consume elsewhere.
Okay.
Thank you. Just to bring up a point about that, I had a discussion with someone with the licensing objectives the other day about sustainable materials, things being decanted into. Whilst we obviously wouldn't accept glass, and we'd consider that in our deliberations today, glass is probably easier to be recycled than it would a single-use plastic, for instance. So I guess those conversations would change, and the licensing objectives are not subjective as such, but they could be twinged. I did argue that the protection of children from harm could be dealt with under climate change, because we are leaving the planet to them, but that's a moot point. But I'd like to ask if Councillor Symes has any questions.
Yes, I do. Firstly, those 2 premises you're talking about at the entrance to the pier, which you indicated are licensed premises but not being used as such, I believe they're already leased, aren't they? How could Mr. Anik suddenly move into one of those if the licensing authority didn't grant a licence today? Mr. Walsgrove.
Yes, I was just about to answer that.
Sorry.
As you know, Mr. Ware owns the pier, and discussions could take place between all the parties. You're right, both premises are leased and they're not being used as licensed premises, but that's not to say things couldn't change.
Okay. Secondly, would this be a case where drink would be ancillary to food, that you would have to buy some food before you could buy a drink, or could you just go there and buy as much drink as you liked and walk off with it?
We haven't proposed a condition that it's ancillary to food, and so yes, theoretically someone could come up and ask for a drink. They can't ask for a lot because obviously it's decanted into one plastic drinkware. The same as the beach bar. You know, people can go up to there, they're doing food as well. They can just ask for a drink if they want. But of course his business is the food. So it's not a case where he's going to try and turn the pier hut into effectively another bar where people just come to him and buy beer, because frankly that wouldn't make him any money, that wouldn't make any business sense. So it is an ancillary offer. That's why it's a very limited range of alcohol that he's selling in any event. But we don't propose that condition. We don't think that's a necessary condition, that you have to have food when you purchase alcohol. But in reality, that's what happened, you know, during August, those 4 weekends. Yes, I spoke to Mr. Anik, and yes, there were some who just came and bought a drink, but they were in a very small minority of people.
So would he object to that condition being applied? If that's the case, if it will make no difference to his business, would he object to that condition being imposed?
Well, as I said, it's not a condition being offered, and if the committee were considering imposing it, they would have to have the grounds and the evidence to support the reason why it was being imposed, and we say there are no grounds to do so.
Okay. Could you also tell me, as an experienced licensing solicitor, why you wrote to residents saying that if in the event that the decking was constructed on the beach, that for anyone from Mr. Alnwick's premises to use it, they would need a major variation to their licence?
So in relation to that decking, if anything is ever used there, so if it's built and anybody wants to be able to consume alcohol there, whether it's a new hut that is built on that decking or whether Mr. Alnwick's business changes, it would require another licensing application. So I was just pointing out that even if this license is granted and that decking is built, Mr. Alnwick's customers would not be able to make use of that. It's not going to be anybody consuming there would be looked at as consuming on the premises. But at the moment, in talking to Mr. Ware, it's not intended that that decking would be supporting Mr. Alnwick's business in any event. I think the intention would be, and as I say, at the moment there isn't no set plan for it, but it would be to look at putting another unit on that decking. But as I say, I haven't got any more details other than Mr. Ware made a planning application, it was granted.
As the alcohol being sold only has to be sold outside that red line, they can drink it anywhere. So I don't see how they'd be precluded from not being able to drink down there, or in fact on the beach, or anywhere outside that red line they can consume that alcohol, can't they?
Yes, that's right. That's right. So it is an alcohol licence for consumption off the premises, but that's not the intention for the decking, to provide an area for people to just go and sit down and drink. As I say, there isn't any intention currently to move forward with that anyway.
And could you tell me how you manage social distancing there? Because you're right at the entrance to the pier, you've got people coming on and off at that precise point, and you've got tables and chairs with people sitting there now, which you didn't have before. How do they manage social distancing?
So they have staff working in the hut itself, obviously preparing the meals. On each occasion I've been there, Mr. Alnwick has been working. He works the vast majority of the hours, and he is effectively front of house, for want of a better expression. So he is able to manage anybody waiting in a queue for food and to ensure that they are socially distanced. Obviously, with this sort of operation, it is a high turnover of customers in a very fast period of time. It's fast food. That's the essence of it. So there haven't been situations where there are large groups having to wait a long period of time and queuing up to get their food. It's fast, it's quick. People get their food and move away quickly.
Thank you. That's all I have to ask.
Thank you. Ben, do you mean to have your hand up, or is that a historical hand? Oh God, don't
Apologies, Chair. No, sorry. I was just typing, so it took me a few seconds to unmute. I'll lower my hand. Apologies.
Thank you. Any other questions, members, at all? No. Okay. We'll move on to the other person's case now. So, Councillor Symes, you are here to represent 5 of the residents that I mentioned earlier. I do have those representations open because, obviously, as you know, as a committee member, that you have to kind of stick to the script of what you're just, talking about. But it seems like everything was mentioned across those few deputations. So, take the floor.
As I said, firstly, I'd like to make a point of clarification. Mr. Walsgrove's client contacted me and I had known him from meeting him in the street and saying hi and whatever for a number of years. He didn't explain to me what he wanted to see me about, and I did ask him. I also explained to him that I was no longer the councillor for St Jude. However, I agreed to meet him because he said it was important. When I got there, he then indicated it was about the old pier hut, and he asked me to withdraw my objection. I then explained to him that it wasn't a personal objection, that I was actually speaking on behalf of a number of residents. He seemed okay with that, but I think somewhere he got confused about what I was saying to him and thought that I had said I was going to withdraw my objection. I feel it would be nice in these circumstances if the licensing officers had contacted me to actually clarify it before they sent it to everyone, because it was a misunderstanding, and it should have been made clear right from the start that I hadn't agreed to that, and somebody should have confirmed with me, because nobody had any evidence to that except for what Mr. Walsgrove was repeating his client had said. So I just wanted to make that point, so that in future, maybe, if this kind of situation arises, that the other party at least confirms that they haven't agreed that measure. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you for clarifying. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay, so other areas of the city have a ban imposed that precludes drinking in public places, for example, Victoria Park, to prevent public nuisance. In this case, it can be clearly demonstrated that the pier already gives concern regarding antisocial behaviour and noise pollution. Adding to this by the addition of a takeaway bar selling alcohol would further exacerbate the public nuisance that is already being experienced by the residents. We have touched on this. How will social distancing be achieved? As you can see, the photos of the tables and chairs that have been allocated to the bar, they don't take into account social distancing. Public toilets. The nearest public toilets are at Canoe Lake, some distance away. How will the applicants ameliorate this? I would like to quote some of the anecdotal evidence provided by those opposing the application, which breach the 4 licensing objectives. The prevention of crime and disorder. Evening drinking venues normally come with a raft of anti-crime measures, including CCTV. As alcohol will be consumed outside of the red line, limits on how alcohol is consumed cannot be imposed. Without the standard anti-crime measures being available, there will be nothing to limit fights and other antisocial behaviour linked to heavy drinking. Public safety. The pier is not well lit, so the potential for accidents after dark is considerable if people take their drinks onto the beach after dark. There is also a possibility that they will go for a swim. You might say, well, there's off sales on other parts of the pier, but when you buy off sales on other parts of the pier, you're quite a distance. You have to walk quite a distance down the pier, round the end and down onto the beach. With this venue, it's directly onto the promenade and directly adjacent to the beach. And I think that ought to be taken into account. Just 1 second. The protection of children from harm. The position of the bar adjacent to the entrance of the pier, the potential for children entering the pier or walking along the seafront to be exposed to strong language and expletives is obvious. It's also not reasonable for young children in particular to have to witness drinking. This application will enable this. Its whole purpose is to sell alcohol to be consumed on the beach or at the entrance of the pier. Is that really the image we want to create on our seafront? The committee should consider whether this is something that the council should endorse, as it will add the potential to seriously and adversely impact the residential amenities of neighbouring residential properties on the only part of the seafront where people live so close. Allowing drinking until 11 p.m. at night in a public space in and around the pier would allow unmitigated noise and light pollution until late at night. All sales will be off sales and therefore no meaningful conditions can be imposed. I haven't finished yet. The Hope and Glory decision by the Court of Appeal clarifies that licensing authorities can take account whether the likely impact of an application is proportionate to its benefits. I would contend in this case that the impact would be excessive, so I ask you to refuse it. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you very much. Members, questions? I will take that as a no. Councillor Mason.
Just a quick one, really, when talking about the social distancing. since the licence will be going forward and hopefully that's not long past the pandemic's finished, I'm not sure if current social distancing is 100% relevant to the licence in whole, because that would be dealt with by health. I don't know if Councillor Simons wants to add anything else on that.
No, I think these conditions are going to be enforced for quite some time. And even after that, I think the proliferation of properties, when is a licence one too many? The pier already has numerous licensing areas on it. Why, when does this end? When does it become proliferation instead of, a nice friendly place for families to be? The licensed premises that were in their hundreds around that period, a period of time in the not too distant past, caused huge problems. And now that's seen as quite a family friendly area. Do we want really to keep on eroding that until it becomes one big drinking cathedral? Thank you.
Thank you there. And any other questions from members? No, I can see your faces, so you can shake your heads and stuff. That's cool. Mr. Walsgrove, do you have any questions of the other person, the representation?
Just a couple, thank you, Chair.
Okay.
The first point about what impact this premises licence may have. Did you have comments back from residents about any problems during August specifically?
There were complaints in general about the noise, the loud music, the loud, behaviour from people on and around the pier. I'm not saying it specifically from your Mr. Aziz. I'm sorry, I've forgotten his name, but I'm not saying specifically from his premises. But I think it's a cumulative impact, isn't it?
You've mentioned the decking again. I know from the residents' letters, it would appear that they may have received a leaflet. Was that something that you had any involvement in sending round to residents?
The ward councillors, myself and Councillor Stubbs, did inform them, but they were told that it was separate applications, that the planning for the decking or it was a planning condition, and that the planning had been given for that decking. Yes, that was information we gave our residents, which I think is the right thing to do. They should be informed of what's happening on their doorstep.
But specifically, that was mentioned.
It wasn't related to to your client. There were three specific things. There was the other application from the Gaiety Bar, and there was the fact that the permission had been granted for the decking alongside the pier, and it hadn't lapsed and it was still able to be built.
Do you accept now that in this application, the issue of the decking is completely irrelevant and doesn't take any part in the decision making?
I think it's something that should be considered, that might be a possibility in the future, but no, it can't be considered here. And as you've said, and as everyone else has said, there's a possibility of being able to review a licence. We all know that that's perfectly within the licensing office ability to bring that licence back at any time. But I do think it does point to the fact that it's very close to the beach, it's very close to the prom, and it does encourage people to consume alcohol along that area of the promenade, which people buying alcohol from those other venues on the pier would be unlikely to do, because what would be the point of walking all the way down the pier to stand outside, whereas this premises is directly onto that promenade.
Thank you, Chair. No questions.
There are ample licensed premises within that area anyway at the moment. You can buy alcohol from several, as you've explained. And what happens if those other two open up? You could say, couldn't you? We can't possibly consider that now, and I acknowledge that. But I do think that all people should be aware of what could happen. And I understand your licence can't be granted on that basis, but I just think it's useful for everyone to know the absolute circumstances surrounding the pier at the moment.
Mr. Walsgrove, is that it?
That was it, thank you.
Thank you very much. If we don't have any other questions, I think we can move to summing up, which we will start on my script, sorry. Councillor Symes, would you like to sum up your case, please?
No, I've really said all I need to say in the in the representation I made earlier. I do hope members will consider. The only thing I would say is I hope you would consider food ancillary to drink. I do think that condition should be imposed. I don't think it should just be a stand-up bar at the end of the pier that people could just go and buy drinks from. And I do think that the closing should be much earlier than 11 o'clock. I think although people chose to go and live near the seafront, they do have some rights. And I think that we do have the ability to do it through the Hope and Glory case. And I hope that you will seriously consider that. I hope Mr. Attrell will help you in your consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. Ben has his hand up. Hello, Ben.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Excellent. I just, before, I was hoping to get in before you went on to summing up, but it matters not. I thought it might be best for me to advise you in open session rather than when you retire to make your deliberations as much as I can. There are a number of issues that have been raised by residents which I have to advise you ought not to take into account at all when you're making your decision. And sorry, I just need to get a document up where I've made a rough note of the issues. I will expand on it if I need to during deliberations. But in terms of need, whether or not there is a specific commercial need for a premises, that's not something that the licensing authority can take into account when it's making its decision. Whether there's planning permission for other areas, particularly the decking, I would concur that that's something that ought not to be taken into account. The value of property, issues regarding parking. There are a large number of issues that have been raised by residents, and I think there does seem to be a thread through the representations that indicates some confusion between planning and licensing. And so I would just reiterate, and you're all experienced members, but I say it just for the matter of public record. Obviously, a lot of those issues cannot be taken into account. That was all, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for bringing up in public session, because I would hope that if there was any residents watching today, it would help them understand when we're making our deliberations that we've not ignored certain points that they've raised at all. Mr. Stone, would you like to sum up? You're on mute.
Sorry, nothing to add other than I think just for clarity, if I might have misheard it, but I think Councillor Symes said to consider food ancillary to drink. I think it's the other way around, isn't it?
Oh, whichever way you'd like to put it, Mr. Stone, I'm quite happy. Could be the other way around.
Other than that, I've nothing to add. Thank you.
Thank you. Then I'll move on to Mr. Walsgrove. Would you like to sum up on behalf of the applicant?
Just very, very briefly, just to reiterate the main points. The first one being no responsible authority objection. The second one being you've got credible evidence from the applicant to show there's no adverse effect on the licensing objectives from operating temporary event notices. Third point is just to remind you what Ben's just said about what is relevant, what is not relevant in the representations. A lot has been said about the decking, unfortunately, which is not relevant. And lastly, to remind you of your power to review, allowing you a light touch to this application. There's no need to impose a condition to make alcohol ancillary to food. So, for example, if you have a group of friends come to the premises and say it's a group of 4 and 3 of them want food and 1 doesn't, why should that one be precluded from enjoying, if you grant the licence, enjoying a beer with his friends just because he's not hungry and wants to eat? There's no credible evidence before you which suggests that's an appropriate condition. If it had been, absolutely, the police would have been asking for that condition and others. This is not a drinking bar. This is a fast food takeaway that just wants to have an ancillary offer for people. And the situation is this, that on occasions when he's not been able to sell alcohol, Those that do want to have a drink of alcohol have either gone to the beach bar, or indeed people that use the beach have been going in the co-op and purchasing their alcohol from there. This premises is not going to attract a new crowd of people to this area. It's just servicing the people that are there. It is a very popular place, and that's why there are a number of shops and food outlets, so that people enjoying themselves for the day on the pier, on the beach and on the promenade can get something to eat, can get something to drink and enjoy themselves in a responsible way. And reference to the previous history of South Parade Pier should also be ignored. It's accepted that that ended up not a very nice place to go, and that's completely changed. Adding the pier hut to have a licence is not going to take it back to those dark days. So I would ask you to grant the application as we've applied for, with the conditions we've offered in the operating schedule. So just like to thank you on behalf of my client for the time you've taken to read the papers, which have been extensive, and obviously the time for your deliberation now. So thank you, councillors.
Thank you very much, Walsgrove, Mr. Walsgrove. We've reached the end of our licensing meeting at the moment. I would ask councillors to meet in the exempt session. It's 11:05, but can we do it like 15:15 so we can have a short comfort break, get a cup of tea, and we'll meet each other. Live stream's about to end, and we'll resume the second licensing meeting, which will be public, obviously, at 2 o'clock this afternoon. Thank you, everyone, for attending today. See you in a bit.
Chair, just before you do close the meeting.
Ben, hello. And Councillor Mason.
Just before you do close the meeting, just to make it clear to all parties that each matter today will be considered entirely separately. So the members will obviously deliberate this matter and make their decision on this matter before moving on to the other application this afternoon. But it's likely that both decisions will be issued at the same time later on today, but that does not mean that they will have been considered together, just to make that absolutely clear.
Councillor Mason.
It's just really, since this is my first one online since we've gone over to the decision, we normally have the people there to announce the decision, and it's all done. We don't have a timescale that we're actually going to be announcing it.
Not particularly. We aim to get out by the end of the day, so we make our decision and then we confirm it with the solicitor, and it gets mailed out by email to the applicants. So
it's done in an email as opposed to us coming back at 2 o'clock and announcing it at the start of the next session.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm not too keen on that idea. It does seem a little bit behind closed doors. I'd have preferred if we were announcing it at 2 o'clock when we start. So
every licensing meeting we've done, we haven't announced in that way. We've agreed through the Coronavirus Act and the change that it's done, and then the applicant is then emailed. I can have a chat with Ben. He's got his hand up. He wants to speak. Go on, Ben.
I think the difficulty is, the reason why we're not doing that, councillor, is mainly because of the intricacies of rearranging yet another Teams meeting for all parties to then be able to attend, simply for the decision to be announced, when actually it can just be emailed round to all the parties as soon as possible on the day. So it was really just to cut down on the IT technicalities and the difficulties involved with getting everybody again back for a Teams meeting.
Oh, well,
we're coming back at 2 o'clock.
Mr. Walsgrove, you're coming back at 2, aren't you?
Yes, I'm back this afternoon.
Well, in that consideration, Ben, I'm happy to announce the decision publicly, because Mr. Walsgrove will be here, and therefore I would want Councillor Symes to maybe be informed and want to come back. I think she definitely deserves to be here as well, because she was part of representations in the meeting. I'd argue if Councillor Symes is able to return at 2 o'clock very briefly at the beginning of the meeting, I
don't know whether Councillor Symes would be able to rejoin or to join. It would be down to Democratic to arrange that. It may well be possible.
I've lost sound with everyone again. I don't know if anyone else.
No, we can hear everyone else. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
It was on and off, so.
Sorry, I can hear everyone else. It might be your internet. I guess
the
we're
council's
arguing
internet.
over the case. If councillors, I think we're on the same Teams link for this meeting, aren't we? Yeah. So if Councillor Symes is able to return at 2 o'clock, so all of us were here that were present during the meeting. Rocky, you doing this afternoon as well?
I am, but it begs the question about what we do for the second hearing, and do we then come back later on?
Yeah.
Tonight, I don't see why.
That's why I definitely don't want to return tonight.
The way we've done it has worked perfectly well, and it's all above board and legitimate. And I actually send out a notice of decision once you've confirmed that you're happy with your decision, and that's the protocol. We send it out to all parties.
Okay, Councillor Madden wants to say something too.
I just want to say that we have changed. We have amended the standing orders to allow us to deal with this and then give the notice later rather than people having to come back. I think we should stick to the line. I don't think we should be given any what could be seen as preferential treatment, because I think Mr. Stone's absolutely right. We then have to say to the next one, it'll take us a while to deliberate, but we will seek to go public at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock or whatever. We have agreed. The standing orders and its amendments to them, and these are only temporary amendments, of course, because of the pandemic at the minute. So I think, you know, the ones that I've been involved in the past, they have worked. People understand that that's the situation. I think we should stick to what we're doing and not make any announcements, or make them once it's made, but certainly not ask people necessarily to come back. It's convenient that Mr. Molesworth will be there, but I think it would be wrong to ask him to come back at 2 o'clock if he was travelling up the country to do something else. So I think we should just stick with what we've agreed.
Leo, I'm 90% inclined to agree with you, so I think we'll leave it at that. I do apologise to other members who wish to. So maybe if we made our decision that had been sent out before 2 o'clock, then we can just open the meeting saying, in respect to previous matters, because everyone had already been informed of that decision, that we could just say, this has happened, but only if the decision has been mailed out before 2 o'clock.
I just wanted to add comfort for Councillor Mason that actually about half of local authorities don't give their decision on the day of the committee, and they send it out by post afterwards. So you are one of the top ranked committees, because you do give decisions on the day to people, but not many do.
I've heard thousands of complaints about Westminster for their draconian ways of mailing it out later, and it's normally our lawyers who come before us saying how dreadful the other places are. So, well, I'm outvoted on this anyway, so it doesn't matter.
I think if there were some delay in terms of issuing the decision, then we would have concerns also. But because we issue it as soon as we physically can do, that's the best we can do really in the circumstances.
Cool. Well, people still post letters. That's the thing, isn't it? I'm moving it to 20. I did say, did I say 20 past? Yeah, 20 past, please, so I can get a cup of tea. Cool. See you in a bit.
Bye.
Off.
So just for clarification, yes, excellent. Meeting's adjourned.
Thank you.